Yeah, I think every artist has that mode. Shifting gears is tricky. Going from especially teaching mode to, okay, I'm teaching, I've got all these classes, and then I have to shift into actually creating a collection. And it feels like a very painful on-ramp to get into that mode. But once I'm running, like once that kicks in, I don't know, but I always have this moment of panic, like after all these years, is there going to be anything left? But then I tickle the muse a bit and it starts to kick in, and then it ramps. It's like this supernatural high. It just ramps up. And in that mode, it's like everything is flowing, really flowing. And so the pieces are coming fast, almost to the point where they're coming too fast for me to catch up. That's like pre-show, that's pre-collection. The hard part is cutting that off when the collection is done, it has to be done because of the time, the deadline happens. I'm just so juiced that it's really hard to let go of that and go, oh, I have to go back to, oh, here we go, down, 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 down. Because there's such a joy of putting that together. Now, as far as the day-to-day, having to make something or wanting to make something, it's a rhythm, and there's certain times a year that I cater to certain things. We just went through February. I call it Heart Hell Month because I'm not a heart person, but as a jeweler and you're making your living, guess what? We get to make all sorts of hearts. So I've got a collection of heart-related things in my little gallery right now. But yeah, there's definitely over the years I've developed a rhythm to, and I have boxes of unfinished projects too. So I don't know if you have unfinished paintings, but there are things that I started and were like really inspiring, and then I got interrupted, and then I had to put it aside, and then you come back to it, and you might not be as inspired at that point. But the real rhythm in my work is that coming out onto that solo show, because I commit to doing only new work for those shows, unless it's a retrospective, which I've done once. Only new work, and I do at least 35 pieces for that show, 10 really signature pieces, but then I commit myself to do at least 35. So but again, it's just like this rush of, when you're flowing as an artist, it's just the coolest sensation ever.
So I was really trying to find women that I thought were interesting, fascinating, sometimes a little controversial in a way too. And so each of the women has a biography that goes with it. And so it's very important to me when I post my work, I usually have some sort of synopsis of what I can find on the web. And I try to keep it more factual and not about my interpretation of them. But I think when you look at my pieces, you can interpret them in a number of different ways. But getting to that idea of how do we connect with these people. So, and then I'm also often asked too about the blackened faces and what why I don't do details in their face. And originally I was more interested in their adornment and like how they wanted to present themselves, because portraiture is so much about how you want to tell your story. And then I was also interested in the fact that there are certain women like Elizabeth or Marie de Medici or Catherine the Great that we already know what they look like. So that's really not important in our head. We already have sort of that image in our mind's eye. So there's an element of you can fill in those gaps. I mean, do you see yourself in this woman? And then there's also some of these women actually do not have portraits that were created during their lifetime. They were not rich and famous. And so the blackened face also sort of registers that omission, that wasn't, they weren't considered important, or they didn't have the resources to actually have a picture created during their lifetime.
And I thought it would be good to talk about those prints before we got into the human flood, because the human flood had a really big print component to it. And a lot of people asked me if I'd ever done printmaking before this. So I thought, yes, I have done some printmaking. So these are a bunch of different images from the human flood. We have a website for the human flood called thehumanflood.com, where you can see all these projects a lot in detail. But in essence, it was the 5th collaboration that Ellen has done with different artists in Washington. And I was with her on the last climate change project that she did. And at that time, we thought about the human flood component, which is what happens to the people who have to leave their homes because of climate change? And what are we doing to support those people? And we thought about this idea for several years. And in maybe 2021, we're invited to do the show at the American University Museum with the small hitch of it was about 3 times more space than we had expected. So we made a lot of work for this and decided that we were just going to pull out the stops and make it in all different media, depending on how we wanted to say what, and also to make it as accessible for the audience as possible. I talked about, I guess, that I was in Artomatic, that I worked on the Wilson Building collection. I also was a founding member of the Mid-City Artists. And Ellen and I did a project called Zeitgeist, which was we curated these shows. We did 4 different shows where we sort of picked a topic and invited a bunch of Washington artists to participate in those. And I love that, again, it's part of my wanting to pull people together. So lastly, there was some work that I did during the pandemic that I thought also relates to this story of surface and looking in and different pieces. But like a lot of people, I just, sort of put my head down and made a lot of work during the pandemic. And this is work from a couple of series during that time. These are watercolors that I did during that time, which might look like trees to you, but they might just look like lines to you. I loved making them. I spent a lot of time walking around during that pandemic time period.
So I started to feel vulnerable, letting it all hang out there with my thoughts and my diaries. And so I started overtyping. And the overtyping also created patterns, which were really interesting to me. And the overtyping, it sometimes types over a line, but sometimes it types between the line. And so you can still read some of the text. And that's interesting to me. All of my typing are my thoughts. There's no random typing happening. And then I moved for a brief period to gouache, which was really beautiful. And this is a photo of my studio. I wish I was there, but the Wi-Fi is really unstable. And it's a glamour shot by Greg Stilly and made even better, improved by Franz Janssen, who took out the chimney that's in the middle and he kind of cleaned it up. But I'm showing you this because it's cool space, but also this is my big typewriter. It has a 36-inch carriage and it enables me to type on larger paper and to make larger work. And then this is some of the larger work. It's typed on Japanese paper. It's kirikata, which is a handmade paper. It's really a great paper for printmakers, and it's tough and durable, but it goes through the typewriter. And this is shiramine, another Japanese paper, with blue typewriter ribbon and blue pastel. So again, I love the patterns and I love kind of the accidents that happen. Like this vertical line here is the tab and the typewriter gets stuck there and I'm not paying attention. And then I've typed over it a lot. And then it just creates this line. It's in almost every one of my drawings, various places.
did this undertaking. I worked with 100 artists of Washington, D.C., and created this book, which highlighted 100 D.C. area artists. It has done really well, surprisingly enough. And for one glorious day, it was the best-selling art book on Amazon. And the publisher has been after me for the last few years to come up with a second volume here, which I am thinking about maybe next year. We'll see, of doing it. All right, this is sort of my current work. If you notice, I'm still sort of now, instead of horror vacui, is like the opposite. You know, when my son was about 7 or 8 years old, he used to look at these and go, "Hey, Dad, when are you going to finish that drawing?" But I'm really interested in having the empty space being part of it. Reintroduced color to my artwork. For years and years, I was just a black and white work. These tattoos, I go back to places you live. These tattoos I learned them and found them in the original people of Scotland. The Scots originally came from Spain. From Spain, they went to Ireland in 451 AD. From Ireland, they started invading Scotland. By the year 700 or so, they had pretty much taken over from the local people who were called Picts by the Romans, or Picti, painted. And these tattoos are Pictish tattoos. So 25 years later, they kind of resurfaced in my artwork. I also do a lot of work embedded in where technology is embedded into the work. This is the Batman brooding. The stuff that you see in the back in there is a written language that I created. As an avian cryptologist, I marry two things. I marry Ogham writing, which is a Celtic form of writing using a line, and a Navy verbal code called the Falcon Code. So there's writing on the wall that is double encrypted, and this particular one says "Missing Robin." Navy guys, if they teach themselves how to read Ogham, they'll be able to break it.
It was so ephemeral too, because they faded actually within like a week or two, and I didn't realize that. But it was just like these moments of like looking at something and finding like so much beauty and joy in it, but recognizing that maybe that was happening because of the ephemerality of it. And I think that those are the kinds of lines of thinking and themes that have been really influential to me in the last couple of years. And then most recently, I've been in the last like year or so, I've been exploring embroidery. And so this mostly just started out of a desire to have a different tactile creating experience, because I have been drawing for many years and I wanted to keep exploring, but I was just feeling a little like I just needed to do something different with my hands than draw. And so I just picked up like some cloth that I had on hand, and I started doing a very simple running stitch. I have done embroidery throughout my life, but just in a very basic sense. And on even these pieces, it is probably the most simple embroidery stitch, which is just going up and down on a piece of cloth with a thread and a needle. And I was just, again, kind of in that focus of how do I capture the things that bring me joy, but bring me joy because of their ephemerality and because of their impermanence. And so in the last few years, I've spent a lot of time looking at water moving in different patterns, and just kind of like seeing how like leaves move when the breeze like hits them, or seeing how blades of grass move, looking at sunlight and how it hits different objects and materials. And I think that that's been something that I've been focusing on a lot more. And so these pieces, especially with the embroidery, are really trying to kind of focus in on those experiences as an individual in a world that like doesn't really afford us a lot of time and space to spend time looking at things like that. But for me, I kind of realized that I need that. Like I need to take those moments, and I need to like focus on those things. And so the embroidery has been definitely a different step for me. A lot of my other work is like very controlled and precise, but these have been a little bit more, I've been working on like building the more like free flowing elements. And so this piece was it was just something that I had in mind, and I was creating it, and I wanted to emanate the movement of water.
One of the people in Long Island when I was a grad student. I painted a lot of boats at Cold Spring Harbor, and I had painted his boat a couple of times. And when his wife, Candy, when her horse died, she commissioned me to do a painting of the horse. It was also done entirely from photographs, and people just take good pictures while everybody's alive. Just in case, thank God for Photoshop. I could manipulate some of this to get more shadows and stuff like this. It's a terrible slide. I never did get a really good picture of it. But because there's all that light shines on it, but I'm really proud of this painting. It's 60 by 40 or something like that. And it turned out well. The horse's name was Twiggy. And these are computer doodles. I have an iPad and a program called Autodesk Sketchbook, and they're great. You can take a sketch pad with you anywhere, but these are terrific, like even in the dark. The one on the left was done in a nightclub at Corner. I can't remember, something Corner in downtown Baltimore, where they have a lot of jazz musicians. And this was done at Germano's. These are the Worthy brothers, who are physical therapists by day and jazz musicians by night. And Sid asked me if I would do this. And this was a painting. One of the security guards at MICA, Officer Green, his mother passed away, and he asked me if I would do a painting of her. And he had this fantastic photograph. And she was standing in front of the station building where he worked. But this was taken, 40, 50 years ago. So I did this from the photograph and from studies of MICA. And I think it's a really powerful image. I like it. And then these are paintings of the neighborhood. This is what I paint. It's just everything that's around me. I don't travel as much anymore. My car was killed in a hit and run in April, but even before that, the pandemic kind of curtailed things. And this is the house across street. It's a wash drawing on the left.
I wanted to be a little bit more abstract with my works. I mean, there is something where I like to say that when it starts looking like a straightforward portrait, people get only invested as to what the subject is. And to me, that's just part of it. I like the way the look is. I like being drawn into the piece. I like to say that the figure is only going to be something where their gaze or their aspects of it can be balanced out as part of the composition. So I actually wanted to go very abstract with it and let the glass really be as wild as possible, where I'm making these kind of a bubble pattern glass that I fire on top of it. I'm going to be using enamels on top. I'm going to be using colored glass that is cut into shapes and just really make the image a lot wilder, a lot more interactive in terms of the imagery. And if I need to be taking and using, instead of black fret, blue fret, then I'll use it that way. And it just gives it a much more of a painterly quality where I'm letting it almost dissolve into the imagery. And sometimes I will actually just start referencing people like Baldessari. And I like the whole idea that the conceptual quality of blocking an element on the figure makes you wonder more about what's going on and what the story is. And some of the pieces I've actually been really abstracting out and taking the formal image and chopping up pieces of glass that I made and firing them on to give a different feel to it and just start telling the story differently, because I'm working with it and then covering it up in a sense.
I think what happens is that in my experience, I started out and that was a very conscious thing. And I think as you move through life, those things become intuitive. I mean, it becomes in the balance and shape and all that kind of stuff becomes ingrained in you. And so if I go out there and paint, and even later, even as the painting's going, I feel comfortable just altering things and still feel good about what's going on in the composition. So in the beginning, it's hard because you have to try to map everything out. But then later, you have so much experience with looking and seeing the balance that it just comes. But it's a struggle. I remember the first oil painting I did, I went out and I couldn't control it whatsoever as far as the composition. It was everywhere. And I came back and I said, good God, I don't know if I'm ever going to be able to do this. But then, you know, I stuck with it, and you just keep developing that. And sometimes I paint without drawing. Sometimes but most times now, I mean, I spent a period of time where I didn't do any preliminary drawing. And that was good for, I think, training my mind as far as composition and those things. And then, so now, you know, I know what the composition basically is when I go out there and I look at it and I say, this is what I want. And I put some lines down as far as, you know, the horizon and things like that, and then go from there. So I do sketch a little bit, and it helps me control it. That's all. I don't want to go out there and have one vision and come out and not realize that.
It's very interesting. Painting the inside of these bowls is really challenging. And every time I'm doing one, I'm like, I don't really need to paint the inside. And then I'm like, no, but it looks so much better. So it's sort of like the over the top that I really enjoy. Another one of my octopuses. This is the details here done with porcelain slip on black stoneware. And they have to be done before they're so everything is leather hard. And I made 2 of these octopuses. I'm not sure I'll ever make them again because they were so terrifying. Like, just trying not to knock the legs off was ridiculous. So I wanted to show this because this was a very large octopus. I had spent a month painting it with little tiny brushes. This was before I discovered the squeeze bottles to make patterns and stuff. So I was using tiny brushes, and I spent a month painting him, and I fired him. I got him out of the kiln, and there was this 1/2 inch crack that went from the front all the way to the middle of his head. He didn't crack in half. He just cracked halfway. And I was like, I am not going to give up on this stupid thing because I'd spent too much time on it. So I started thinking about what I could do. And I had friends that were like, oh, you could do kintsugi, which is the gold lacquer. I was like, do you know how much gold that would have to be? It was a significant crack. And so I was like, well, and I thought back to all of my, my childhood in the Puget Sound where barnacles cover everything and we were constantly getting cut by them. And I was like, that's such a great, because you can't control where a barnacle goes. It just covers stuff, whether it's beautiful and precious or not. So I made the barnacles for this specifically. I had never made them before. And I was so pleased with how it looked that I started putting them on many other pieces. I think the organic nature of them next to this graphic sort of nature is wonderful. And I love doing them. And so I glaze around these. It's a little tedious, but at least they're bisque fired. So it's not a super fragile thing. It just takes time.
This is another project from around this time where I was drawing on coasters. Like I would just get these blank coasters wholesale and, throw them in my bag. And, I had a nice long commute. So, whenever I was bored or just wanted to sketch something or was hanging out, waiting in line, I would just, whip out a coaster and draw something I was seeing. I remember this one is from when I was at an airport and the plane was delayed, and I just drew passengers waiting in line with their luggage. So, which you can kind of get a sense of here. And then eventually I had like 400 and change of these. So I had a show at the Flashpoint Gallery, which is sadly now a coffee shop. But it was my first fancy gallery show. And I sold them, each one of these for, I think, about $50 each. Yeah, it was, I'm really pleased with how this came out. I think I still have a good chunk of these in like in a box in my room somewhere. But yeah, you can see the volume. And then, just some more examples of stuff in this vein. I was getting a little less attached. This was inspired by a trip I took to Istanbul around this time. This was just watching some guy eating brunch. this is one of my other very overly hatched ones, where I kind of just did like a view of a house. And this is like a little map of New York that I just sort of added my own stream of conscious notes to. And around this time, I also started a little later. I kept adding more text in some of these drawings. They still like didn't, tell like a traditional narrative, but I was, adding like little fragments of thoughts. Like if I was listening to an audiobook when I was drawing, I would add stuff from that.
This is another painting that I did at the same time. I think with a similar process. So just to show, I'm not going to like go into like the same breakdown, but it basically used a similar process and has a similar like surface texture as well. Oh, and this I don't know if I said in this last slide, but I was trying to show like what the surface itself actually looks like up close and how the paint in some areas, like I really enjoyed how thin the paint got in this area and really felt like brushed on, like you get all of the little recessed areas. So in this area, I liked it. In some areas I get more frustrated and I end up just like globbing thicker pieces of paint on to kind of cover over. And so I think you can see that a little bit at the bottom too, but I just wanted to show that. This is a smaller tree carving work, and I just wanted to include this because I was still kind of also working on these at the same time. Lots of things are happening at the same time. Yeah, and I think I've been thinking about ways that I can use paint differently in different pieces, meaning that like here I'm, I think, more clearly depicting the trunk of this like thin tree, like I'm kind of like more direct painting that, whereas in others I do think I'm using more like layers of paint to build like atmosphere, and others it's more, yeah, like I said, like atmospheric or about mark making. And so I think I'm trying to think about how different like strategies of painting can exist in the same work too. So that's something I've been thinking about lately. A few more things. Something else that's felt really important in my practice in the last 2 years is drawing. It's become, a lot more important. It's also just really helped me, like, I think digest spaces, especially since I'm not working from life as much more. I can go draw in a space, or I can draw from photographs too, but I think it helps distance me from spending the time, the same way you'd spend time in a space painting from life. It helps me think about how I'm spending time and like, what am I really gravitating towards, or like, what is special about this that I can get to? And that's, so it's been helpful. And some of them I think turn out really cool as drawings too. And so I've been enjoying them as their own thing. And some feel like more of a vehicle for getting to the painting. So it's both.
This is in an old industrial building where I used to have my studio in Baltimore. It's right on the railroad tracks on Oliver Street. And of course, it has this wonderful I-beam down the center, which allowed me to rig this piece the way that I wanted it. And so here I have people that are counterweight, and so you're using the gearing of the rope sling to do this, so that a weight can lift like 7.5 times its weight because of the wrapping of the rope around the pulleys. Simple gearing or simple lever technology. Anyway, and so we had either that or machines holding up larger machines. And the idea was once more to remove the notion of agency. So we had all of the participants bound in an adjacent room, and then they would just be brought out and rigged. And so here are my assistants. The young woman over there was, because I was actually in one of the pieces, and so she ran the whole show for me. She's fantastic. Her name's Yassine. She's brilliant. She's now studying at Yale. So anyway, so here we had, and I had different kinds of slings, so that I had these, I had the supine thing, then I had this other one which kind of held you, and then I had these other ones which were almost like an easy chair. So if somebody was getting too much strain in the one device, they could be moved into another, of course, without their help. You would just simply lower them down, put somebody out of one device, put them in another, and so on. And this was to go on for about an hour. The first time we performed it, nobody said anything for about the first 20 or 30 minutes. And so I was encased in this thing and I could hear nothing at all. And it was really eerie, and just, there was so much tension. So the piece, I think, was successful. Anyway, so here's just some pictures. So here's the rear view you can see of the restraint. The people were also blindfolded. And then, we just have people tending to people.
So I've always been doing self-portraits. I took a portrait painting class with an undergrad that was really kind of eye-opening, and that gave me more confidence. But here's one. This is right when I moved to DC, so I looked very young. So, but there was still a lot of fear, and I put this in because, not that it's great, but I remember the feeling of painting this, and I held back so much. It was a backlit portrait, and I was so scared to do it. There was so much fear in this painting, and that's what, I don't know, not that you could tell as a viewer, but it's, I just wanted to include it. And I didn't even finish it because I was too scared. Here's another one. I was looking at Anne Gale a lot, for you that know Anne Gale, a little too much, but, and then, okay, here's one that I did. So this is one I did in 2010, and I would have kind of a set palette that I would use in terms of like ivory black, yellow ochre, cad red, like, this kind of Zorn palette, or alizarin crimson. And so then I didn't do a self-portrait again until 5 years later. And I thought, what happens if I approach the portrait like I do the still life? And this is what I got. And I was really excited about it. There's just more specificity in it, I feel, and it's just richer. It had richer colors to it. And like the background is almost pure doxine violet. So I'm a color nerd for sure. And then this is one I worked on quite a lot. And I started it in COVID. So here's just a series of self-portraits that I've done over the years. Here's one I had just almost fractured. It was a high sprain to my ankle, so I had to sit down and paint. I remember that. But I was really interested. I don't know, the painting's a little bit garish, or I don't know, not as sensitive as maybe I want, but I like this light coming on the chin. And this is a drawing that my daughter did of me, but I'm sitting in a car. You can't, anyway, it's a drawing she did. And then this is one I did last year, and it's a small one, but I usually don't put earrings in. This was before I got my glasses. So this is one kind of at night. And then these two are the last self-portraits that I've done. This is 22 by 18. I actually entered it into the National Portrait Gallery in London again this year, and it made the second cut. So cross your fingers, it makes the next cut. I'll find out March 4th.
First, I might backtrack and try to answer the question, is pastel painting or drawing? And different people think about it very differently. I have friends up in New York who swear that it's painting. If you had to ask me, I think of it as drawing because it's dry and it's dealing with dust, and I sort of push it around, either with points or with my fingers, and it just feels like drawing to me. But you're dealing with full spectrum color. So it has the range of painting. So it's a very interesting question. I don't think it's one that needs to be answered. It's got qualities of both in it. But I think the main point is, this is my oil painting palette. You can see it's all here on my little palette right here. I have 15 colors or something like that. And if you compare that to what you're seeing in front of you, it's a huge difference. So with oil painting, what you're doing is you have your colors and you're spending your time mixing, right? With a palette knife or with a brush, hopefully with a palette knife, at least sometimes. Whereas in pastel work, you're hunting. You're trying to find the stick that you want. Many of the values are sort of pre-made for you. So you have to find the stick that's right for you. So it's a question of hunting rather than mixing, I would say, is the biggest difference. Another big difference, and I think probably what draws people to pastel, is that it's very matte. It's completely matte, whereas oil paint is very, very shiny. Right? So there's no glare in pastel at all. And so the colors are brighter in some ways. They're a little bit flatter, but they're very bright, and you don't get into that problem of dark areas getting all glary on you. So sometimes for aesthetic reasons, like oil painting is kind of like eating roast beef all the time. Whereas, you know, sometimes you want an omelet or a salad or something, and pastel has a lighter feel to it.
Some of the more pleasant things. So after I felt like I got that out of my system, I'm like, oh, okay, I need to do something that's not heavy because all that was so heavy. So I just went back to what I know, right? So I went back to painting from observation without much invention. Just let me hire a model. Let me hire a model and just paint the model. I just need a break, right? And let me try to paint the psychology of this sitter. I paint my kids, you know, like I said, they'll sit, but they move. So I use a photograph to help me with the drawing, but they're still sitting there so I can see the color and light and understand. Lots of cupcakes, lots of iPad. I'm also just painting interiors and trying to think about the psychology of that interior and what inhabitants may be in that interior, which I'm the inhabitant, but you know. I just felt so good to kind of like not paint something so heavy. And that's pretty much where the work is now. I go to a model session every Thursday night and draw from the model. Most of the time I can control the setup. So, you know, I think about things I want to draw. But this model's for my life drawing students so they can complete their homework, but I draw with them. You know, I have dog props. I got lots of props. And I do think about the content. I think about it, is there content here? What's going on with the figure? But again, like right now, things are a little bit lighter. I think they'll remain that way for a little bit.
Here's a few of them. On the left, many of you who live in New York know about Hart Island or have seen the show Pose. Hart Island is an island just a couple hundred feet off the shore of New York City. And in the 80s, 90s, the families of people who had AIDS would not collect their bodies because they had disowned them totally. And those people are buried on Hart Island across that way. There's a huge mountain, and under that are the bodies of the people who passed. I go there. I've gone there twice. I go there and usually leave something under the dirt behind. It's a very challenging place to be, to see all the people that are there only because their families disowned them. On the side, just a remembrance pieces, all the people who died of AIDS. It's there. You see the bas-relief glass is kind of swirling around there. On the left is Club Q in Colorado. 5 people dead from a crazy shooter. On the right are 49 stars, one for each person at the Pulse nightclub who died from people who had their own internalized homophobia, and it's horrible to have to witness this. It turns out, by the way, the director of Urban Glass lived right next door to Pulse, right near it when it happened. It was deeply moved by it. So we were going to partner with her on an upcoming project that unfortunately didn't turn out, but you never know who is affected by these things. Here, oh my God, thank God we're in a utopian queer future. Here we go. It's the beginning. This is gay marriage is now codified in the Constitution, which means it's very hard to get rid of gay marriage now, because I anticipated that my husband and I would not be married much longer. I just thought that the Supreme Court would erase our marriage. I used my straight studio mate, and I pressed him into service here and said, "You're going to hold my hand, goddammit." And so then we put it on in. And later that day, we went to Trader Joe's, and we were chosen as couple of the week, by the way, Trader Joe's. So his wife was so proud. Anyway, that's our hand, and that's in bas relief. That if you put your hand that would feel feel like a glass hand. It's quite thick, you know.
You know, and you see in all of this early work, when I first started with glass, I wanted to bring in windows. I wanted to melt old windows, and I brought them into studios. Immediately told, no, you can't do that. And I snuck them in anyways, but there was no real course on how to do this. So I've just sort of like tried making things. In the middle, you see like, you know, various bits of broken glass and how they melt together. And I was always experimenting with what looks better. How do I fire the kiln to get different looks? And actually the piece on the right, I think is very similar to, is from the same series as the piece from the Tacoma Art Museum that Michael mentioned that has just been acquired there. So as you see, these are all bits of window glass that I shatter and then melt back together. I love these old traffic lights. I love the sort of like time frame that I get. We had access to a neon studio at the time, so I was able to bend some neon. Now it's all LEDs these days, but the whole idea of a traffic light giving the fourth dimension of time to your art piece was fascinating to me. So you get this, sequence of events. The Washington Glass School. So we teach classes as well as make our own work, which I actually really enjoy the classes. I enjoy working with people who are starting out on a new journey in their art career or in their, just after lawyer during the day kind of thing. They want to do something at night to practice their brain in a different way. And it's so much fun to see people work with the same medium and the solutions they come up with and the aesthetics they come up with. I really enjoy it. I also teach metal classes, and actually the metal classes have become one of the most popular staple of the glass school. So they always fill up. I'm always having to do overflow classes, but it's fun. It keeps me going, and I love that sort of like human interaction that you get. Working with your own art can be a little solitary at times, but here you just have a big group. We're all working on something.
This is an example of a kind of figure painting. This is a detail from a nude model, and this is the full figure. Just pretty typical kind of academic work, where we focused on accurate drawing, trying to really render and model form. I guess the only thing about this particular one that's a little unusual is that I, even as a student, I started becoming more interested in the idea of building paintings in layers and not necessarily just doing direct painting. So there's a fully rendered grisaille underneath this one. Unfortunately, I couldn't find a photograph of it, but that's been a big part of my approach. Is I tend to separate thinking in tone versus color. So at the end of my student years, I studied with a number of people, Harvey Dinnerstein, Ron Scher, Jacob Collins. I don't know if any of those names are familiar to you, but they're all people that were teaching quite a bit in New York around the time I was there, like in the early 2000s. But at the end of that, I kind of started becoming more interested in painting outside. I really loved landscape painting, but had very little experience with it. So I just started going out and trying to apply what I knew, which was really careful, slow, observational working method. I tried applying that to working outside. And so I do things like this, like tree drawings in pencil. This is a very early oil landscape of a tree. And so I didn't really have much of an idea of what to do other than to go out, set up, work as carefully as I could from life, tried to kind of match what I was seeing, and then I would come back for multiple sittings. So I think this painting took me maybe like something around 6 or 7 separate sittings where I'd come out day after day under the same light.
I'm exploring this new thing with ink on paper and paper sculpting with paper pulp, which I don't know anything about. It's quite fascinating. So I'm making these things. Again, I don't want to make things, but I am becoming more open to bringing my body back into the piece a little bit more, like using gestures and things like that to at least be part of the process. I'm not making a piece, but I'm contributing some sort of a bodily gesture to the piece. But then there's also other things that are outside my control and subject to the temperament of the material in a sense. So I'm making these what start out as Enzo discs. If you all know what that is, that's the sort of the Zen circle, the half complete circle, that I then do various processes to and it goes completely wild after a while. So these are ink on paper, basically watercolor on paper, more or less, except these are all sort of start life out as completely black. And using water to sort of move things around a little bit. These are paper sculptures that are made with, in this case, a brick and some pulp that I made, and playing around with the pigmentation. These are natural pigments. And occasionally I'll talk to people. I'm not great at talking to people or seeking people out, but sometimes it's good to sort of ask what people have done. But I do like this process of like banging my head against something and it's feeling impossible initially and feeling like an unsurmountable task. I like that aspect of it. I don't want to be told what to do. I want to sort of struggle. Not that like it's a fetishization of struggle, but there is something to be learned. And if someone tells you like, oh, don't do this, do this, they've already blocked off a lot of potential happy accidents. Let's say that, But whereas if you're doing something and like, I don't know what I'm doing, I'm not supposed to mix this pulp with this liquid or whatever, and you could completely destroy it, but you could also discover something that maybe wasn't there before, or you hadn't thought about, or maybe someone else discarded as an undesirable result, but you like, so I like doing it on my own and going through this process of fumbling around like I'm sort of, in a dark room, just kind of feeling my way through and seeing what comes out.
I had a beautiful studio space to work in under a graduate program that had some pretty stringent demands. And I just worked with a lot of practicality in mind. Namely, I couldn't afford models, so I used myself. And after that very logistic matter was solved, I kind of reverse engineered why the hell I was doing it. It was truly a means to an end. I was available and willing to put myself in dumb costumes, so I did a series of self-portraits. But then later I said, no, this is all about self-reflection and a God complex. I made them large because I thought that was the thing to get gallery notice. And these, when I say large, I mean, I measured the cargo elevator and figured out I could get a 6 by 8 foot canvas inside of an elevator. Well, then I make a 6 by 8 foot canvas. You do that for a few years and yeah, you might get some gallery attention and maybe some gallery representation, but then you have these paintings. And if they don't go into a collector base, you have a pretty outstanding inventory to deal with. And that's something that I hadn't really considered or had been forewarned or had been taught. So now I have this warehouse of humongous canvases with no home to go to. And it was just ridiculous. So I started working smaller and more practical and thinking, if I want to find a collector base and have people enjoy my work in their homes, I need to paint things a little more modestly and not be dependent on a gallery selling to a big collector to get it to a museum in that kind of a trajectory.
Okay, so here's Spiky. Now I'm into job site copper. And so what job site copper is when people, when builders are doing their thing, roofers or whatever, but this is a nice heavier that I can hand cut and use. And it also, that literally is one piece of copper, even the back pieces with all the points and that's all one piece that I made a big pattern and then folded it and shaped it into what you see as this shoe. And so this is the same way. This is, of course, newer, brighter copper. And now I have finally found something I can put over the copper to keep it rather bright for the rest of its life, a nice liquid. And so this one, I was inspired to do this shoe by leaves, oak leaves that I walked across on the sidewalk. And I thought, my goodness, I think I can make a shoe out of that shape. So I played with it and this is what it came out. And the stem, of course, is your little ankle strap. Now this one, we have the the downspout material, and I like to do these feathery looking things. This was built on an antique shoe last. So I could add this antique wheel to the back and this copper mesh on the inside. And then that beautiful patinaed downspout.
This one is in Oklahoma. It's a triptych and it's in a park in Norman, Oklahoma, where University of Oklahoma is. I did this during the pandemic. It was kind of a tough, I had to drive it out there across Arkansas, Tennessee. It was a weird time to be driving across the country during the pandemic, where different people's realities were very different. But anyway, it's sort of so much of my work is meditative. So this has a hole right in the middle, and you can sit on those two small pieces and sort of gaze out at this kind of vista, and the hole gets large to small. So it's sort of like a meditative focal point. And then I did I did one of these at the Joan Hisoka Gallery and I've just really enjoyed doing a series of these. This is at the University of Maryland Hospital Center. And Laurel did a piece there, and Margaret Boozer did a piece there, and I did a piece there. So the three of us have our work in the same setting, which was kind of fun because they're all Mount Rainier artists. And so this is cut out like a very thin, not MDF, but like a very thin board cut out. So I kind of choose a paint color for the wall, and then I cut out the pieces and then mosaic them. And then it took 3 days to install it because there are all these little pieces that you have to kind of get to flow together off the wall. But it's made of probably like a couple hundred little pieces that then are woven together. And so that's sort of the side view. It's almost like a bas relief. It's got some dimensionality to it. But I really, to me, the work, I want it to have a flow to it because I'm working in cement, I'm working in glass, like I'm working really hard angular medium, and I want the work to I want it to feel like there's fluidity to it.
And that show, somebody who was in that show liked my stuff and said they wanted it. Her name's Wynn, her last name's Wynn, Van Wynn. And she invited me to show it in Virginia at the Mosaic Arts Gallery. And so I put a bunch of prints in there. But one of the things that's sort of new in here, all right, is now this painting. And that's a rubbing and a painting. And this is going to feature in my show coming up. This is really a year and a half away from where we are now. It has a lot of energy to it. I like it. It has the direct contact with the stuff we throw away, which is attractive to me. It has a lot of energy in it. Just almost an expressionist quality, abstract expressionist quality to it. So then I have my Artomatic. Artomatic came at a time when there were a lot of other things going on. I had another show at Portico that was getting ready to drop, and so I was kind of a mess, last year at this time. So this is a piece that I made, and you can see it's blue, and it's done with the masks, where I put masks down on the and then I print on top of it, and then I go back into it. I'll show you my process a little later, but you can see that I cut this into 5 different parts, and I think it works here, but I've done it on other times where it doesn't work, and I've been told by a number of gallerists that although I think it's really neat, they don't. But it got bought by a PG County, so I'm happy with that. You can see some smaller prints that I did. And now you can really see that they're on panels at times, or they're behind in these frames.
I control them by the rods. So there's a center rod that goes through the body, from the neck and through the body. So I hold onto that rod, and the hands are controlled by 2 separate rods. These are 3 characters: DeAndre, here, Mr. Zeke, and Smooth Earl. Each of the characters has a backstory. One of the shows that we've been doing for a while is called The Children's Civil Rights Crusade. And this is a story about a young boy who has a very strict grandfather. He wants to know what his grandfather was like. He wondered what his grandfather was like as a child. He comes across an old newspaper from 1963 that says Negro children go to jail. And he looks at the photograph and he realized that one of those kids behind bars is his grandfather. So he says, oh, I need to find out what that's about. And he learns about how children in Birmingham, Alabama were very instrumental in protesting nonviolently for the civil rights movement, how they faced firemen with water hoses and attack dogs and policemen. So as he's telling the story, he's the narrator for the story. And as he's telling the story, he's also manipulating these other puppets. This is Maya Opinion. And she is the type of person who has an opinion about everything. So, and she also has a really large size martini glass. So whenever she makes a comment, she stops to take a sip. I just wanted to share this with you, if I can get this going.
I'm Cordell, and today we want to wish, hey Cordell! Yeah, Smooth Earl, we're making a video here. We're going to say Happy Father's Day, man, because it's Happy Father's Day this weekend. We need to say Happy Father's Day. That would be smooth. And where did Happy Father's Day come from anyway? Who started that? Well, some believe that Father's Day began in 1908 with Grace Golden Clayton of Fairmont, West Virginia. She campaigned for the date for children in a nearby town to remember their fathers. There had been an accident in a mine and 360 men died.
So we started experimenting with Zoom during COVID when everybody was on lockdown. Puppeteers in the community started doing things on screen, and we learned a lot of things. I was working the camera with one hand and holding a puppet with the other, and just doing little snippets of things.
So these images by Lee Friedlander are all taken from within the car, and served as a pretty strong influence for this next set of work. Part 3 is the car as a lens. So now it's 2024, it's nighttime, and we are going to 7-Eleven. This is just down the street. This is the 7-Eleven actually that I grew up going to in Arlington, Virginia. So this is a painting that I made of that 7-Eleven. I decided that I was going to paint every 7-Eleven in Arlington because a friend and I, when I was in high school, decided that we were going to go to every 7-Eleven in Arlington in one night. And at that time, we went to, I don't know, 11 or 12 7-Elevens in the night. And it was just one of those things, like when you're a kid, there's not a whole lot to do except drive around. So much of the suburban sort of existence is shaped by the car. The landscape itself is shaped by the car, as shown by 50 States work, but also, you know, convenience stores exist sort of in relationship to the car, and the parking lots outside the convenience stores, like 7-Eleven, they become third spaces. So it's, you know, in the suburban landscape, we lack third spaces, which, if you're not familiar with that term, first space is home, second space is work, and the third space is something else, a gathering community space. In a landscape defined by cars, we really lack third spaces. So what becomes a third space is the parking lot. So after I made this painting, I realized, all right, I've made a lot of paintings like this. I sort of look at this landscape in a different way.
I started to gather photos of the shadows and the sun shapes that I witnessed. I had wanted to make drawings of them, but the timing didn't feel right at first. I took photos for a year and I gathered over 100 of them before the drawings began. In the spring of 2021, I had the unfortunate experience of a miscarriage, and this would be the catalyst for the creations of the drawings. To help cope with such a sad experience, I needed to make something beautiful. As I was choosing which photos and shadows I wanted to draw, I realized I was interested in the idea of in-betweenness. There are things that are real and discernible and objects present in each image, and there are things outside of the frame that are only known through the blocking of light and the creation of shadow. Each one is drawn to scale, in that it is the size that the shadow occurred in my home. I was definitely busting out the measuring tape to make sure that I was getting them just right. I initially created 4 pieces. You just saw morning, midday, and afternoon, and this is evening. The idea was to capture a full day's experience of how the light shifted through my home. And this piece, Evening, is the one that the Baltimore Museum of Art just acquired, which is very exciting. I was given an opportunity to show them in an artist-run space that is literally a shed in an artist's backyard, not that far away from me here in Baltimore. It's a great space that the artist set up as a way to socially distance and still see art. You signed up on a calendar and you got a private viewing of the art that was in there. I think throughout the time that she had this, that she was using the space, she probably had up maybe 6 or 7 shows of work that were up for about a month.
There was a little less time to sometimes execute those paintings, so I started to polish the drawings up, advance the studies beyond very rough compositions, and they became digital prints. And these were 30 by 30 inch prints, and they were a shadow box, they were framed in a shadow box. And I just started to think about the Goya product as a surrogate for Latino people, and that I could communicate ideas about them or about the Cuban culture, because Goya is Caribbean, it's not just Cuban, but I identify it as a very Cuban product for me, but in all honesty, it's encompassing the Caribbean peoples. There's also sometimes you just want to have fun, and again, promoting coffee, this was a very prominent thing in my home, but also I just love sunflowers, so I did a couple of paintings in this way. And I also wanted to include some nature. Remember, I started off painting birds. So I have one piece over on the far right here. It's called Caffeine Buzz, and there's several bees that are pollinating. And I kind of like imagine these pieces as being something where you might have it in Brooklyn, like on a windowsill, and it's an impromptu setup with coffee cans, and you're just, you know, keep your sunflowers there. This is where I started to really dive into just the history of pop art and understand Lichtenstein better, and just the use of Bend-Aid dots to activate the surface or to be a surrogate for other textural aspects that traditionally would have been done in a painting with gradations and such, and other ways of producing tonality.
And that sort of questions of physics, you know, what's the nature of reality? And I don't want to say that and give you the impression I can tell you anything about the mathematics, I can't, but I like sort of the mind bending aspect of thinking about how often when I'm reading about these things, I'm finding you sort of have to hold in mind 2 things, right? Where, and it's sort of the same in any way. Like I compare it to the reality that we all experience as a shared event or through digital media, how we're all sort of building this language and these spheres of influence, and how images can operate as symbols and how perhaps we come together digitally to do different things. Like, let's say there's a tragic event and we're all in digital spaces, sort of, if you're not directly commenting or participating, that's not the best word maybe, but it's a word, you're still viewing it and it's mediated, and it sort of, is that real? How do we share in an experience in the same way that, if you're reading about sort of that famous physics experiment with photons of light, where if they're going through two slits cut in paper, an observation makes the difference of how that light, what it chooses, which slit it goes through, or whether it goes through both. And so is reality sort of our lived experience, or is reality sort of this thing that, I want to say it's unknowable, but how do you question the structure of it? What is, these are like things that are even sometimes hard to put into very concise speaking points, but there's sort of no such thing as like an objective experience of anything, whether that's literally, whether that's online, whether that's whatever.
Another point of inspiration is not being afraid of completely demolishing an old painting. In this painting, I was working really large, and it's easy to stop. I get asked a lot by students, should I keep going? The painting isn't what I wanted to say, or, oh, I'm afraid to do any adjustments to it because I might ruin it. I say, go ahead and ruin that painting, because why do we need another mediocre painting? At a certain point in your growth, you have to be ruthless as to how to get better. You have to just be humble and know there's always going to be artists that are better than you. They're going to win more of the prizes, and they're going to have better composition. So get busy and get to work. And even if you're just painting for fun, how much fun is it to completely always have a lateral move? You do want to get better. So here is a series of the walkthroughs of what I did to this painting. I kept repainting it. I reshaped the mountains. I reshaped the clouds. I simplified. I took away the critters. I had an increase of lower light. And this is just some of the stuff I did to this painting. If you're looking at the date up top, we're going through several months. And I worked on this for about half a year. So here I'm starting to rekey in a higher key, and even catching some shine for this. And with oil, you have to add a subsequent dot of oil when you're going over with heavy layers. And here's what the final painting ended up like. I recalled that what is my subject light, is my subject dark. It's a dark division. I was getting all jumbly in the background, and I needed to put these trees up against a lighter sky. So if we look at the simplicity, sometimes it's easier than we think.
And to me, this oversized hand represents hidden forces in life, some sort of a power from a higher being. Could it be a fate, or could it be an act of God? Whatever, whichever one makes it out to be. That's what I imagine. And these mysterious unknown forces, in real life, they are invisible, but in my work, they are quite visible. They can be actively engaged in whatever action that is happening in the pictorial spaces, in the stories. In other times, they may be simply just there, giving a little gentle support or giving comfort, or sometimes they could have some sort of oppressive nature to them. In this painting, once again, the grown-up self is carrying the less developed or underdeveloped selves, components of herself, encapsulated in a biblical symbol of innocence or purity. And she's trying to carry them as carefully as possible, as gently as possible. And she's caring for them. Yes, of course, there are times, certainly I really feel like, these three characters are completely bound together, and I just cannot separate them because they are one, but they are entangled in a way that is impossible to read them out and understand them. So this painting sort of expresses that despair or the condition.
I make Dharma sculpture whenever I need to express my personal feeling or thoughts reflecting to the world. This Dharma was made when we were finally able to travel after COVID vaccine was developed and available. Dharma looks happy, but it didn't feel, I didn't feel completely safe to travel. It was like sailing on a boat, on leaf boat feeling. So this Dharma has a band-aid on the shoulder, suggesting the vaccine shot. So going back to some old works, besides personal expression through Dharma, I have been making works based on my questions and curiosity in the social and economical value or conditions in the States. This work is called American Beauty. So I learned that how teeth looks so important in the States, way more than in Japan. I got used to floss my teeth, but I still don't understand the obsession of perfect white teeth in this country. Well, I don't find any problem in people with a little crooked teeth unless it affects their health issue.
So I was doing these for a while, and then I had at the same time I had this exhibition, I had another exhibition at Black Rock in Germantown, Maryland. And I didn't know what to do for that show. And the fact that I had two solo shows going on at the same time, I was trying to figure out how to make them different, and I was ready to do something different also. And that's when I remembered that I had seen the Roy Lichtenstein retrospective at the National Gallery of Art. And it was amazing. It was way better than I expected. I'd up to that point, I respected his work a lot, but with most pop art, people interpret it as a little too one note-ish. But the breadth of his work and his approach was amazing. And one of the things that he had was they had a whole room of artworks where he was taking other artists' work, famous works of art, and interpreting them in his own style. So in this case, he took Monet's Rome Cathedral paintings and, created them in his Bende dots. And so I decided to start riffing on that. And so for this exhibition, which actually came together in maybe 2 months from when I decided what I wanted to do. And then I was like, oh, this is the show. I have to create a whole new show for a really big space. But it's one of those moments where, all of the ideas flooded to me, and within 10 minutes, I had the entire show laid out and designed, and then it was just executing it. So it's great when you have those moments. So I started riffing on other artists' work, but instead of doing their work in my style, I thought, well, what if I did my work in their style? Because I'd already created these icons and repeated imagery. And so I just wanted to figure out how I could manipulate those icons that I had created.
So I began to make these sculptural forms on photos that I had taken. So the base photos of these two images, this is from a project called Memories of a Decade Past. And so they were images that I had created and printed and then just kind of put away and forgot about them. And I don't know if I was moving or for whatever reason, I think I might have been moving into my studio at Arlington Art Center, that I found them. And I was like, well, what am I going to do with these? The photos aren't super strong, but they had sentimental value to me. So I began to experiment with building layers. And this is really kind of when my deep interest in fruit in my work came into play. And so I build these collages and then photograph them from above. And going back to fruit, I love fruit for many reasons. One, I love color. I love smell. And I love the symbolism of fruit. You know, fruit has been an offering to the deities, to the gods, to royalty, to everyone for a very, very long time. You know, we give fruit baskets at the holidays. There's something very special about giving fruit. And I think it's a really great metaphor for life. You know, here's your fruit. You have to eat it now. You must enjoy it. You must juice it and like just really relish in the sweetness of it before it rots. And so I did a whole series of these photos with a combination of artificial plants and real fruit. And then I photographed them. And this was the work that was shown at Hempel in the Carroll Square Gallery. So continuing with the photo assemblages, I was now starting to think about like, what if we are subtracting images, elements of images from photos without Photoshop, with the hand, like we actually like cut out pieces.
So, and one of the stories, I guess, in this community as well, a way that I kind of learned a different dimension to the community is that there are all the VA hospital that's now down in Baltimore Center. Gosh, I forget the name of the facility now. It used to be stationed out in Sparrows Point, and there are these incredible homes out here. Right on the water that were fixed up actually in 1979, the year I was born. They were all kind of built up and re-roofed and re-windowed and repainted. And then because of this sort of stalemate between the federal government, the state, and the county, essentially, they were just left abandoned. So they put all this money into it and then decided, you know, it's going to make a lot more sense to have the VA hospital in the city instead of out here, you know, just in terms of access. So these houses just laid fallow. I mean, they were left alone. And, you know, osprey nests would crop up, kids would go in and smoke a joint. You know, some of these things burned down, you know, but I actually had an opportunity. This was about 8 years ago where I went and I did a project where I documented all of these structures, you know, just painted all of these structures. Was really interested in some different artists, de Kooning's like Door to the River, you know, that sort of more expressive, you know, sort of color notes. You know, I was painting with like a 2-inch brush on some of these. I mean, I would get into some line work, but much more painterly, much more open, fast, you know, something that I don't normally do at this scale. So I did a whole series of these paintings, and 2 feet, these are 2 feet square. This one's 4 feet square. And then, you know, those ideas sort of trickled back into the interior. So after that year, you know, I kind of thought, well, I don't really know how that works into the rest of my work, but I started doing these paintings as interiors too. When I brought them in and was framing them and working on them to present, they kind of became this interesting architectural structure within the structure of the interior. So I did a series of these paintings that were sort of based on the paintings in situ.